will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit, for political purposes, my opponent's youth and inexperience.
A date which will live in infamy.
Ich bin ein Berliner.
I know words, I had the best words.
They said that they have questions that they simply mustache him.
Chinese tires!
Hello. Welcome to Reasoned Refrain, episode number 2. Randall, welcome. This is our friend Randall.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey. He's going to be joining us today in the third microphone. We'll hopefully have a variety of guests for your viewing and listening pleasure. To begin, I got to welcome you to the new year. It is 2020. Isn't that wonderful? Unfortunately, I don't have anything insightful to say about it.
Well, how are you spelling insightful?
Like that.
Okay.
Of course, like that.
What do we got next?
I believe we're faking news.
Oh, yeah.
You are fake news.
Sir,
go ahead.
Can you stay categorical?
Into our first segment, faking news. As Trump would say, faking news. So
I like that. Got that down.
Gotta have the accordion hands when you're doing your Trump impression, okay?
That's good.
All right. Let's go.
All right. Well, Senator Elizabeth Warren, who is leading polls in Iowa as late as November, has tumbled to fourth place in the state as party moderates, Pete Buttigieg and Joe Biden, have surged in the polls. Voters apparently don't care for Warren's new campaign slogan, Iowa, lot of money.
Another one about Elizabeth Warren. She's announced that if she's elected president, she will mandate that no new buildings or houses will be built unless they are carbon neutral. Bernie Sanders was quick to one-up his fellow senator when he promised that under his administration there would be no new buildings or houses built.
So, after struggling to raise money early in his campaign, Joe Biden announced large fourth quarter fundraising numbers last week, topping $22 million. It's his best yet. Most of it has come in large donations, sort of contrast to Bernie Sanders, who brags about how everyone's donating 15 cents to his campaign. Anyway, relieved, Biden says he no longer plans to cash in his Spanish-American war bonds to help fund his campaign. Remember the Maine.
Yeah. With the recent U.S. action in Iran, Senator Bernie Sanders has worked to brand himself as the ultimate anti-war candidate. He's done this by reiterating his long record of very vocal opposition to any war in the Senate, where he has denounced such conflicts as the U.S. involvement in Iraq, Vietnam, San Juan Hill, and the Battle of Fort Sumter.
He's a very vocal anti-war proponent.
Very much.
Also, a sign reading, "I ran for president," was seen this past weekend at a protest in Texas. While unconfirmed at this time, there are reports that the man holding the sign was, you guessed it, Julian Castro.
Get him every time.
He is everywhere and nowhere at the same time.
Michael Bloomberg recently had a great coup in his campaign bid for president when Judge Judy announced that she would be endorsing him. However, the question of quid pro quo was quickly raised when it was revealed that his girlfriend had received custody of their dog just a little too easily.
Also, Trump got in some hot water recently for saying that Nancy Pelosi's teeth were falling out of her mouth when she was being asked about why she didn't include bribery in the articles of impeachment. She clapped back like a champ, saying that she had a better grip on impeachment policy than anyone. In fact, she had the best polygrip around.
Oy vey.
Additionally, the New England Patriots dynasty may have ended this weekend after a 20-13 loss to the Tennessee Titans. Much feasting and rejoicing over that prospect. Also, Tom Brady may be retiring or seeking to sign with another team. Fans were particularly wary when he announced he'd be calling his friend Brett Favre for advice.
Don't
text Brett Favre for advice.
Switching topics from politics, Tesla sold more cars in 2019 than in the previous 2 years combined. Too bad they blasted 10% of them into space. Fortunately, the other 9 cars are still all on the road. It's quite remarkable.
President Trump ordered the killing of the most notorious terrorist alive at the time. He did this just months after ordering the killing of the most notorious terrorist alive at the time. This, of course, was a far cry from the actions of his predecessor, Barack Obama. You're never going to guess what he did. Are you ready? You ready? He ordered the killing of the most notorious terrorist alive at the time. Crazy, right?
Is that even a joke?
Yeah, we're just stating facts. That's that's 2 segments from now, right?
Yeah.
True story.
Well, here's another true story. A 58-year-old Martin O'Connor from LaPorte, Texas, was hiking in the Grand Canyon. He'd been missing for 11 days, but he was found alive. He was airlifted from the canyon to be checked out medically. Asked for comment, his wife said, "I must have told him to stop and ask for directions like 1,000 times. He kept claiming he knew exactly where he was." That's how it goes. Yeah. That's how it goes. Your wife puts something in your ways, and you're like, "I know a shortcut." She's like, "No, you don't."
We both know so much about this.
Ty's got all the experience on this one.
Well, I say that I always drive, so I don't. I always get directions. The United Methodist Church, the last remaining major denomination in the United States which has never undergone a split, is expected to undergo a split over the sanctioning of gay marriage and the ordination of gay clergy. In addition to voting on the split, the organization is also expected to vote on renaming itself the Ironic Methodist Church.
Finally, for faking news, Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, and Meghan Markle, his Duchess, announced plans to split from the royal family and become financially independent. They said that their reasoning, in part, was to raise their son, balancing their time between the UK and the US. Their statement said, "This geographic balance will enable us to raise our son with an appreciation for the royal tradition into which he was born, while also providing our family with the space to focus on the next chapter." Many will remember that previously the couple had declared plans to only have 2 children to help fight climate change. It's nice to know that they're continuing the fight against climate change by only flying back and forth across the Atlantic all the time. Okay, maybe not.
Canada's right there.
Yeah, right.
You've got a monarchy, technically, and you're in North America.
Hey, at least they're doing it for altruistic reasons, right? Like avoiding in-laws. That's the important thing.
I thought they were just going to sail with Greta on her sailboat back and forth, right?
And then fly the crew back.
Right, of course.
Oh.
That wraps up faking news.
You are fake news.
Sir,
Go ahead.
can you state categorically?
Our next segment, one that you should be seeing regularly on the show, In the Olds.
Hey.
No, we're not talking about the Cutlass.
To begin with, In the Olds, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez explained that her office did not intend to get rid of all farting cows, regardless of what the Green New Deal proposed. Among those most relieved from this news was Eric Swalwell.
Chris, so far, the evidence is uncontradicted that the president used taxpayer dollars to ask the Ukrainians to help him cheat an election.
Got him. Will we ever find the real answer?
I love that
You
clip.
have a coffee cup to drag across there.
Here, look. Oh, there we go. If you didn't know, there are 4 different Herods in the Bible. We are taking it way back in this one.
Mm-hmm. Very old.
They are Herod the Great, Herod Agrippa I, Herod Agrippa II, and Herod Antipasta. He pairs well with a Caesar.
The theologian dork in me has to make sure that you know it's not actually Herod Antipasta.
He's
I
killing
know
all the
I have
fun.
to kill the joke, but Herod Antipas, for anyone wondering. All right, sorry, go ahead.
It's
No, but
appropriate
this
with a certain amount of cheese.
That's what makes it fun. Well, right around this date, on sort of this day in history kind of news, right around this date, in 1814, we took a little trip along with Colonel Jackson down the mighty Mississippi. We took a little bacon and we took a little beans, and we caught the bloody British in the town of New Orleans. Yes, we fired our guns, and the British kept it coming. But there wasn't as many as there was a while ago. We fired once more, and they began running on down the Mississippi to the Gulf of Mexico.
If Stephen gets to ruin the last joke, I do have to insert my historian bit that the Battle of New Orleans was actually in 1815, but clearly the popular music of the day was a little off track.
Also, we were defending New Orleans. We didn't march down there.
So basically, Johnny Cash was just entirely wrong.
Johnny Horton. And he died in a
Horton.
plane crash.
Okay.
Like the next year after this was released. That song was actually a big hit, not only in the United States and Canada, which if you've ever asked a Canadian about the War of 1812, they'll tell you about how great they were and how they won it. It was also a big hit in the United Kingdom. A song
Really?
about the Americans beating the British.
Sounds about right.
Did
battle was a big
Alanis
hit.
Morissette sing that one?
It was indeed like rain on your wedding day.
So ironic. The only ironic thing is that it's written by a woman who doesn't know what irony is. All right, moving on to, so we've done faking news. Now we're going to actually go to breaking news. We want to talk a little bit more seriously about what's going on.
One bombshell after another.
A couple of news stories I wanted to highlight in particular, particularly for this audience, for what we want to talk about. Conservative, biblical worldview analysis sort of stuff. Things that have to do with the LGBT movement and what's going on and what Christians can expect coming down the pike. This story is a little bit chilling. A man was jailed for he got 16 years in prison for burning a rainbow flag. Here are the facts of the case first. We'll talk a little bit about it after. He's a man living in Iowa, Ames, Iowa, was convicted on hate crime charges, which is a Class D felony in that state, as well as third-degree harassment and reckless use of fire charges. Here's the thing. He got the maximum possible penalty for the hate crime, 15 years for the quote-unquote hate crime of burning a flag, 1 year for the reckless use of fire, and 30 days for harassment. He stole the flag off of the outside of a United Church of Christ in Ames, which I went and visited their website, and again, speaking from a conservative Christian viewpoint, it is chilling to see how they speak of God on that website. The final thing on their statement of faith, which I think they don't even they decided not to use such divisive terms like a statement of faith or a creed of beliefs. It's things that how we like to talk about God is how they put it on their website. But they said at Ames UCC, you will find a full range of theologies about God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, but one commitment to being in loving relationship together. I include that more because the fact that where this flag came from claims to be a Christian church, quote unquote. It's an open and affirming church that is much more concerned with social issues and telling you what to think about LGBT issues than it is about proclaiming the gospel of Jesus Christ, that you're a sinner in need of a Savior. And if this is actually a church, they're supposed to be committed in some degree to what the Bible says, which specifically says not to be in suit against your brother. Which, again, this man claims to be a Christian, and they claim to be a Christian. So even if they do disagree about this issue, the church is violating command of Scripture by pressing charges against him for this crime. Now, I'm not going to defend his crime. He should not have stolen the flag, should not have burned it. I think we would all agree on that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think so.
We're supposed to be treating our brothers and sisters, our fellow humans, as respectfully, lovingly. We're not supposed to be perpetrating any kind of acts against them, particularly against their property in this case. Mm-hmm. However, the punishment fitting the crime here is astounding to me. You take any other case of someone stealing someone else's property and burning it, you're not going to find anything where you have that scenario where someone gets 16 years as their sentence. It's completely astounding me that burning a flag is considered a hate crime. No particular person or even class of people were harmed by that. I mean, our country actually specifically protects flag burning as a means of speech, as an expression of speech. Specifically, when you're burning the American flag, you are allowed to do so because it's an expression of free speech. Yeah. So how are these two things equal? If burning a flag is an expression of speech, not any kind of an action that is punishable, but free expression, then why is it in this particular case? It's because there's an agenda. That's the only real conclusion anyone can draw from this sort of a thing. I want to hear you guys chime in and thoughts about that. That's my take on it, at least.
I suppose from a legal perspective, do we know how long? Pardon me. How long this law has been on the books, and is there precedent for this type of punishment for any crime similar? Not to say that
those are good questions.
We obviously I think we would all say the law is very heavy-handed in that point. Is this application of the law out of line with what has been going on in Iowa before, if we're going to say it from that standpoint? It is interesting to note that in the things he was charged for, apparently he was not charged for the theft of the flag, which would seem to me to be the first charge or the first thing that, when this is reported to the police or however this went down, the first thing you would notice is the flag was stolen.
Yeah.
Then, okay, what happened to it after that? The flag was stolen, the flag was taken down, the flag was burned. I have not had the opportunity to read up as much on this as I would like. So, but this sets a tremendous precedent for cases involving LGBT, cases in general involving what would be classified as hate crimes. You could open up a whole can of worms about discussing hate crime, or all crimes of hate, or does a hate crime matter beyond another crime? The thought behind, of course, the hate crime laws is to deter hateful opinion by adding who defines what hateful opinion is.
Exactly.
Then becomes the government's within the government's purview. But obviously, the design of it is to discourage hateful opinion by making there being additional criminal penalties to acting criminally involving that. But in a sense here that most of the punishment was not really. It was the overwhelming majority of this punishment is under a hate crime law rather than a law about what he did that broke the law beyond that.
I'll add from the research that I did do. So the normal penalty would be 5 years for a hate crime in Iowa, and he got triple that because this was not his first quote unquote felony.
Okay.
They didn't list what his other felonies were for, but they filed it away under repeat offender, therefore harsher punishment.
Okay, so in this case, maybe it's not 15 years for the hate crime may simply be because it's compounded. Right. That was the primary charge that he was charged with, correct, and they're compounding that.
No matter what, I'm sitting here going, it's quite clear that the charge was greater simply because of who was represented by the flag that he was burning.
No question, I think.
Right, and that's the nature of the hate crime law. I guess the question we can ask ourselves here is he able to go and purchase his own rainbow flag and then burn that?
That's a good
on his own
too.
time or on his. Is it publicly visible? That becomes part of it too. Does it become a hate crime if he does that? If he does it in his own yard, I don't see how you even prosecute of it. If he does it in his front yard where somebody might see it, is that prosecutable? It's on his own property. If he's doing it on someone else's property, then does it become a hate crime?
And hate crimes, I think themselves are kind of dumb. Crimes are crimes. Period.
It's very thin edge there where is the limit?
Yeah.
Well, I was on a grand jury once in which we were asked we had one hate crime case, and it was probably the only case where there was any significant dissent in opinion on it. But most of that opinion, again, when you're on a grand jury, you're not to consider, whether you find the law valid or not. You're asked to consider the government says this person ran afoul of this law. Do you agree? Mm-hmm. But nevertheless,
you agree that he ran afoul of this law, right. Not do you agree with the law?
Do you agree with the law?
Correct.
But most of the discussion came about from a couple of members of the grand jury who basically they disagreed with the hate crime laws on that principle. We don't need to add additional punishment. A crime is a crime. So I just coming from experience it was a federal grand jury, federal legal system. It was very interesting to see how that played out. Mm-hmm. I did see how that case ultimately played out in the newspapers, and the people that were sent before into court on those charges and how those were that I believe ultimately they did not find that they violated the hate crime law. They did violate the law. But they could not find enough evidence to say that. So obviously, with a grand jury, you're voting to send it to trial. So it's not about is there enough evidence to convict, but is there enough evidence to have this discussion? Okay. So I'm going to say here we said we did the wrong thing necessarily because of what our role was as a grand jury, but nevertheless, it was interesting to see how that played out and the kind of discussion that's sparked in a room of 20 some odd citizens, here in the greater Houston area.
That's cool. I would add, back when people first started burning the American flag, it was an arrestable offense, and it took some time for that to be worked out. So I cannot imagine that this decision would not be appealed, and I also personally cannot imagine that if this makes it to the Supreme Court, a conservative panel of justices would uphold the conviction. Yeah. Now, again, is this
I don't
something
think this is
that
one that's going to make it to the Supreme Court?
Yeah. But, is this something that a moral Christian should be doing? Absolutely not. Yeah. But I have a feeling that the penalty will not ultimately be so severe.
Well, the key way to prevent this is just to make sure that former Chicago Cubs, Los Angeles Dodgers outfielder Rick Monday is everywhere. If you don't know, Rick Monday famously snatched an American flag away from some fans who'd run onto the field of Dodger Stadium and attempted to burn it. While he played for the Cubs at the time, he did not play for the Dodgers.
I remember that. Okay.
And they had Dodgers actually put up on the video screen, Rick Monday, you made a great play, which Dodgers fans were probably happier when he hit a home run off of Captain America, Steve Rogers, to defeat the Montreal Expos in the 1981 National League Championship Series. But nevertheless, Rick Monday is remembered to this day for preventing some people from burning a flag.
There you go.
A couple other things in breaking news. Massachusetts legislature has a bill that's currently being referred to Joint Committee on Judiciary. It's called Remove Obstacles and Expand Abortion Access Act, or ROE. Sorry, I have to joke about this because otherwise I'll cry. The constant desire to have every act have a succinct little acronym that means something. So, okay. Basically, the point of this bill is we want to be able to kill babies all the way up to birth, including partial birth abortions. This would be protected under this bill. And so in the fight against abortion, we have many states are gearing up for the eventual overturning of Roe v. Wade, with the prospect, like you mentioned, of a conservative court. Now, I actually don't think that Roe v. Wade will get overturned by this court, but talk about that another time. So it's a bill to keep your eye on. We got an overlay with the link to the bill so you can read it for yourself. So this is going on in Massachusetts. In many states, they're all trying to cover their bases and say really lay out where they stand on the issue. You've got your red states who are writing anti-abortion bills, and your blue states writing the most heinous abortion bills we've ever seen in this country. And if you don't know already, you will after listening for a little bit. Abortion is one of the top issues that I take issue with and want to fight against. It is the evil of our time. It is the slavery of our time. It is the removal of the human rights that are actually guaranteed in the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, that all people are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among them life. It's the first one listed. So we're not going to talk about that too much right now. We gotta keep moving through breaking news, but we will be talking abortion.
We could go a long way down that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's terribly sad.
Yeah.
Bill.
Trump derangement syndrome update. So I'm going to try and do my best Trump act. So if you don't know, we might be at war with Iran. I don't think it's actually going to come to that, but here's the basic facts of what occurred. There've been mounting back and forth issues between Iran and the United States and different aggressive actions on both sides. Trump tweeted in response to a 2-day attack by Iran-backed militias on the U.S. Embassy. I say attack, riot. I mean, the liberal media would have you believe it was peaceful protesters, probably somewhere in between. But people were storming the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, and Trump tweeted in response to this, Iran will be held fully responsible for lives lost or damage incurred at any of our facilities. They will pay a very big price. All caps. This is not a warning. It is a threat. Happy New Year.
It's a nice little closer, isn't it?
Classic Trump tweet, right? A couple days later, he ordered an airstrike, which specifically targeted and killed Iran's top general Qasem Soleimani at Baghdad International Airport. It also, I think I heard, I'm not 100% sure on this, but it also took out the number 2 guy. So he took out the top 2 generals in Iran. And we say generals loosely. I think it's the U.S. has officially categorized Soleimani as a terrorist. He is. He's killed hundreds and hundreds of people in acts of terror for political reasons. So there's not really a big debate of whether or not he killed a terrorist. Iran has announced severe revenge against the U.S. for this airstrike and for killing Soleimani. And part of that severe revenge took the form of them launching a couple of missiles at a U.S. Military base.
Air base, I believe.
Air base.
Yeah.
The missiles putzed out pretty quick and didn't hurt anybody. So that's the status of the situation as it is right now. It's really funny to watch the two sides. So I don't know about you guys, I might be disagreeing with you on this, but I'm a little bit more of a non-interventionist. I take a little bit more of a libertarian position. If I had my ideal world, the U.S. would just never talk to anybody else and we'd just do our own thing.
Classic Monroe Doctrine.
I recognize that we don't live in an ideal world, and unfortunately the U.S. is the world's police. We have to kind of clean up stuff because we're the top dog on the block. So I get that this is just how international foreign policy works. There's a lot of question as to whether or not that this hit was the correct move as far as morally speaking. Look, the guy's a terrorist. We kill terrorists. That's what the U.S. does. But I don't weep too much for Soleimani's death. I weep that he did not have the opportunity, or he did not believe the gospel. I wish that he had. He will be condemned to hell for all eternity. That's what I believe, unless he believed in Christ Jesus for the forgiveness of his sins, which all evidence says he did not. But he was also one of the world's biggest terrorists, killed a whole lot of people. If anybody on this earth deserved the death penalty from the United States, he did. So that's what he got. So I'd rather have just I don't really know much on foreign policy. I know the U.S. is the top dog militarily, and deterrence is a good thing. So overall, I'm not too upset about the situation. If you were to watch the liberal media, it's a circus and it's the end of the world because we're going to go to war with Iran now. But that's the update on the situation at large. You guys have any quick thoughts on that?
That's a tough one for me. There's that borderline between governments have been placed on earth under God's authority and thou shalt not kill, right? So it's still undecided in my mind. What I do hope is that it ends here. That is my personal hope. They got in their little parting shot, and I hope we do not escalate this. Personally, that's my 2 cents.
Well, I think I wouldn't consider myself to be a tremendous student of foreign policy, though I do say I do read about it as it comes in the news. It's a tremendously thorny issue. I give a lot of leeway to presidents on foreign policy mix-ups, even though they can often cost lives and money, and it can be sad and infuriating because I believe, especially nowadays, in dealing with state-sponsored and often stateless terrorist organizations, foreign policy, and as it pertains to conflict, war, firing missiles, shooting guns, is a tremendously, it's a difficult minefield that there's not a lot of precedent for how to deal with. Battle lines, not that terrorism or guerrilla tactics and things like that haven't, or, stateless actors have not existed before, but not on the international scale that we have seen here in the recent things. So, you won't ever see me saying that every action George W. Bush took as president for foreign policy was a good idea, but I understand the challenge that he faced. I understand the challenge. I believe there's such a tremendous challenge that he faced that President Obama faced as well, and that President Trump faces now in dealing with an enemy that's its reach, its capabilities for killing and terror are unprecedented in history. Yeah. We don't have a playbook on how to deal with these people, and thus far I don't think we've written a very good one. But I'm willing to. I'm not going to sit here and get upset that somebody did. Get tremendously upset that somebody did a bad job when we don't know what a good job is for dealing with terrorists those backed by Iran, terrorists like ISIS, terrorists like those backed by Saudi Arabia. This all came about because we were hit with essentially an act of war, but not by a nation on our own soil.
Yeah. That was Trump's final straw. It was like, look, he overlooked Iran shot down one of our drones. Destruction of property. All right, fine, we'll let you get away with it. But when you start coming onto our national soil in Iran, but the U.S. Embassy, and start potentially costing American lives, that's where he's going to draw the line.
Well, we could say we could go to war to defend our interest in so many areas. Understandably don't have the stomach for it because war is terrible. Yeah. We could say, well, Iran should be this way. I think even those who lean left probably say Iran should be different than it is now. Yeah. But for us to go and impose that will on them or attempt to do that, we've seen in Iraq and Afghanistan how tremendously challenging that is. Yeah. Even though we went into a country, wiped out, or certainly eliminated a tremendous number of those who, we would say are doing bad things. Rebuilding it is tremendously difficult. We don't have. We almost thought like we went into Iraq, we kicked out Saddam Hussein, and then we could Marshall Plan the thing and turn it into West Germany. That hasn't worked. Yeah. But you forgive us for trying that. It worked when West Germany.
It's pretty much never worked in a Middle Eastern country. You got to recognize culture plays a big part. A Western culture is going to acclimate differently to a republic that respects freedom differently than a Middle Eastern culture, and that's not racist to say, by the way. Culture, not race.
Based in fact.
Well, clearly we know that there's so many challenges of that, and so I think it speaks a lot to how difficult, how much of a quagmire this type of foreign policy is. In that, President Trump talked about when he was running pulling troops out of foreign. He almost ran as a non-interventionist. He talked a lot about foreign policy mistakes made by predecessors, and yet he's involved over there. Barack Obama did the same thing.
Everybody runs as a
It's
non-interventionist, and when they realize just what role America has in the world, they necessarily become more of an interventionist.
So, finding the right balance between the pragmatism of defending our interest abroad and the principle of trying to let people be people and countries be countries is a tremendous.
Which is actually so.
challenge.
That's a great trend. So I'm gonna real quick update you on two other things in breaking news, and then we're gonna move on to our meat segment. But one thing, if you haven't seen Ricky Gervais's monologue at the Golden Globes yet, you need to go watch it. Aside from the crude language, I love it. It was a spectacular monologue. He gave Hollywood the what for and did it spectacularly well. He hit them for all sorts of things, primarily their hypocrisy and the fact that they can't take a joke. And they sat there and didn't take a joke and proved him right. Watching the cutaways to the faces of the people listening were almost as great as listening to the jokes themselves. And actually, we'll play a little quick clip right here so you can see some of the best stuff. So, you should definitely go watch the full thing. It's great.
Yeah. Of course, that was his last time. He said it was his last time.
It was his last time.
So I guess he was going out of. He does make a habit of being trying to be a fly in a lot of people's ointment. To be fair on Ricky Gervais, he's a very loud atheist, and he likes to. So is he always funny? It's funny to see him take some people to task that probably deserve to be tasked. Just know when you're looking at the messenger, he also thinks folks like us deserve to be taken to task.
Oh,
as
absolutely.
Well.
Yeah,
so
he
let's understand our messenger.
He's an equal opportunities offender. He will go ahead and tell anybody that they're wrong for what he thinks is right and wrong, and he'll do it very hilariously. I actually really like Ricky Gervais' stand up, but. Anyway, you should go watch that whole thing. It was hilarious. Finally, big thing that's coming down the pike. UMC announces a plan to split over LGBT issues. If you've been following this, it's been for almost decades at this point. They've been talking about a split over specifically the issue of homosexual priests and other service people and ordaining gay and lesbian people in the denomination. And it seems like they have finally announced a plan that both sides, the traditional side and the progressive side, can agree on. The vote is going to take place in May. The plan right now is, as it's been announced, is that the traditionalists are going to split off, form their own denomination, and they'll get $25 million as they go to start out with. A lot of this has been, a lot of the issues of why they haven't split yet is partly because of property. So the UMC owns a lot of property. A lot of church buildings are all under the umbrella of the UMC. And so these traditional churches that want to leave the denomination because of how liberal it's getting and how much they don't respect the Bible anymore, they want to be able to take their building with them. And the UMC is saying, well, no, we own that. So,
well, and that's something we need to understand about the United Methodist Church. It's a Protestant denomination. I think a lot of us who come from backgrounds with Baptist or non-denominational churches think of churches as being very independent, self-contained. The United Methodist Church is an organization with a top-down structure. Yeah. The church itself owns buildings. The church appoints and quite often rotates pastors and ministers through churches. They have officials going up, bishops and directors and people who are appointed and sit in positions of authority above pastors. So it isn't simply as simple as saying some Methodist churches saying we do this, other Methodist churches saying we do that. Yeah. When the organization has that structure, they have to present that consistent message, because you may get appointed a minister, a pastor, or you may wind up under the authority of a bishop or director, right, who is taking a stance opposite of what maybe most of the congregants of a particular church would take.
Right. And this is a little bit anecdotal, but while that's the official structure, and it does still happen, it has the culture of the UMC has shifted. There are a lot of churches that are officially Methodist, part of the UMC, that don't really even respect or subscribe to the top-down structure, and kind of operate more like Baptists on an individual level.
That's true.
So yeah, both kind of things are working there. But we'll keep you updated on that as it develops, particularly in May when the vote happens. We'll let you know. Moving on to our meat segment.
Something's flesh! I want meat!
Segment. So you might have noticed our table dressing today. We're going to be talking about guns. And part of why I invited my friend Randall here is that he and I share an affinity for firearms.
Yes, we do.
So we want to talk about the biblical worldview of guns. We want to talk about what the Christian should believe concerning guns. And it's a thorny issue. It's one where I think that you can at least have some variety and some discussion among Christians of goodwill. I think there are some hard and fast rules that you have to take away on the issue of guns, and we'll kind of approach those and bring them up as we talk. But to start out, I want to kind of start the discussion though on lots of these kind of thorny issues. There's always going to be a balance of pragmatism and principle. You hold to your principle and you line out this is the ideal, this is the standard, this is what we're going to believe and proclaim. Putting it into practice, then you run into sinners. Go figure. And sometimes the principle breaks down a little bit, and everybody's kind of got to figure out that balance personally of where they're going to compromise on their principle in order to. For the sake of some practical effect. And this happens all the time. The easiest thing to point to is voting, right? When you're going into the voting booth to pick somebody, you got to figure out, this is the principle I stand on. This is what I believe should happen in the country. This is what I want to happen, but I've got only a few options here. What things am I going to compromise on as far as principle for pragmatic reasons? What are the things that I have to see happen? And so, yeah, this person doesn't have the same immigration view that I do, but they're going to fight real hard to end abortion. Okay, you're going to weigh those two things. And which one's more important to me? Which one is going to win out? And so I kind of want to just get a general. I want to go once around the table and get a feel for, first, in general, where should principle be sacrificed in favor of practical effects? When do you think? What are the basic rules you think you're going to try and follow as far as balancing pragmatism and principle? And let's give a 1 to 2 minute answer, and I'll cut you off if you go too long. So start with Randall. What do you think?
Sounds good. I think I'll open by saying I heard someone say once, well, if something could save even one life, wouldn't you be for it? And of course, the answer to that would be no, because we might as well ban driving, ban swimming in the ocean. I mean, there's all kinds of things. So
stop all free things.
Exactly. So definitely any place where there's freedom, there are going to be, as we said with Stephen, sinners. I think that as a Christian, we do have a moral responsibility and a biblical responsibility to, not cause our brothers to stumble. I think that is probably one of my bigger talking points that we'll get into a little later.
Okay.
But overall, I think that, especially in a place like America where the government is very strongly based on a separation of church and state, that we as Christians should, of course, consider our Christian views, but the law is not necessarily going to be based on that. As far as practicality goes, I think it doesn't particularly matter if I have a gun or not. If someone who intends ill will wishes to obtain a means to effect that ill will, they will do so. If that makes sense. That was kind of a wordy explanation. If someone wants to do a bad thing, they'll figure out a way to do it. Let's put it that way.
Okay. I agree with that.
Yeah. So I don't know if I really answered your question specifically, but...
Okay. Yeah, you hit around it. Ty, what do you think? Pragmatism and principle?
Well, I think it should be understood that principle, you should be living out your principle in every way in which you can control. Pragmatism comes into play when you're faced with a situation you can't control. You don't have ultimate control over who's on a ballot when you go and vote. You have control over who you vote for, or you can choose not to vote, which I would say either of those positions is inherently sinful. But certainly,
You wouldn't say either of those positions?
I wouldn't say either of those positions are inherently sinful. I do recommend voting, by the way. I'm just if that is your choice not to vote and you have a good reason not to do that, that's okay. A lot of people don't have a good reason not to vote, so that they don't vote. But
a lot of people don't have a good reason to vote. They have no idea what they're voting about.
Well, and that becomes...
And they shouldn't.
That is, yeah.
that becomes an issue as well.
Two sides of that coin.
But you live out principle in the areas which you can control. If you disagree with abortion, you don't get an abortion. If you don't feel you can control yourself with a gun, you don't get a gun.
Yeah.
That should be your Christian principle, because if you're doing those types of things that harm others or in contrary to Christ, but you're going to encounter situations in which you don't have control over that. You should always be expressing your principle in the way that you best can, but you may have to do something pragmatic. Thou shalt not kill. If you're drafted as a soldier in war,
What are you going to do?
What are you going to do? You could be a conscientious objector. Some people do that. Some people feel that the principle of fighting for what's right comes that, and I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more on guns. But
as a great limiting principle of what you can control, where the pragmatism enters is in what you can control. And I was going to say something similar. You stole my answer. So
sorry.
No.
Now we see why I'm just a guest
notes.
speaker.
Well, we have to bring in a ringer because I don't own a gun, so we need it wouldn't make much sense.
I needed somebody
to
to gang up with me against Ty on the pro guns. Well, Ty's pretty pro gun too, but on the gun owner side.
Right. So I don't own a gun. You're not flashing my address down there, are you?
No.
Not flashing mine either. All right.
I live near a police substation.
Okay. One of the things I wanted to point out, so just for anybody wondering, chamber's clear. There's no magazine. All right, so. One of the basic things that Christians should recognize about guns is they are tools. They are an inanimate object that gets animated by someone. So as Randall started to point out, was what matters is the person who wields the weapon, not the weapon itself. And I think that's something that on the political side of things just gets lost immediately. We start trying to talk about the moral character of the object and not the moral character of the person wielding the object. The other kind of considerations for the Christian, I want to kind of sketch out some basic sides from the biblical perspective. The basic cases that you're going to hear on both sides, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of this other stuff. But on the pro-gun side, the group that says Christians can and should own guns and is right to do so. Excuse me. There's what I just mentioned which is what matters is the nature of man, not the nature of the gun. So. Man is deceitfully wicked above all else. It's Jeremiah 17. All of sin and fall short of the glory of God. All men are sinners. And so you're going to have sinners who are redeemed, given a new nature by faith in Christ, and men who have not been redeemed, have not been given a new nature by faith in Christ, and just men who are sinners, not redeemed yet, but still have a recognition of the moral law enough on their hearts that they're not going to go and commit the most heinous acts because of fear of what could happen to them. You got all these different kinds of people in play, but the fact is, it's the nature of the man that's the issue, not the nature of the gun. Second thing, from a biblical perspective, as far as the pro-gun side, is going to be the reality of war and the possibility of it being holy. And something that a lot of people don't want to admit about God and about Jesus Christ himself is that when he comes back, when Jesus returns, if we read Revelation chapter 19, he wages the most brutal and bloody war that we've ever seen on earth. He is going to come in slashing and killing and call the birds of the air to feast on the flesh of all men. This is going to be a gruesome, bloody fight to the death eternal death. And he is going to wreck shop. War itself is not necessarily sinful. What makes a sinful war is the motivations. And the only, so the real caveat to this is that the only holy war is the one that God himself fights. Man can hope and pray that God is on their side in a particular conflict, and man should fight to defend the moral law that God has established. No guarantee that he knows what that moral law is. The last thing on the pro-gun side, though, is a basic understanding of a right to defend oneself. And this is the primary argument, probably. The central text that's the best one for the pro-gun side as far as, does the Christian have the right to kill someone in self-defense? And it's Exodus 22, 2 through 3. And basically it's one of those laws that the nation of Israel had given to them. And the law said this: if a thief breaks in at night and you strike him on the head and kill him, you are not guilty of his blood. But if a thief breaks in by the day and you strike him on the head and kill him, you are guilty of his blood. What's the difference? Point being, somebody breaks in at night, they have ill will. They have ill intent in coming into your house. They are trying to do you harm. And so, according to God's law given to Israel on Mount Sinai, the moral justification of self-defense and killing someone in that act is okay. You're not guilty of that man's blood. That's the strongest argument, in my opinion, in terms of the pro-gun side of the Christian, of do you have the right to use lethal force to protect yourself and your property? Yes. At least God said that the nation of Israel did, specifically. And I don't see, if the law is supposed to be a perfect representation of God's moral standard, then it reasonably follows that the Christian has the right to use lethal force to protect their life and property. If there's a cause or evidence given that such a defense was warranted.
Well, so I guess we're to interpret the day-night separation not as one of day and night, because I don't believe there's any laws on the books in the United States. Sorry for those who think we're setting up a theocracy, but I don't believe there's any laws about day and night shooting intruders day or night on the books in any states. I could be mistaken, but I don't think so. But we're to interpret that basically as someone who intends to do you harm versus somebody who doesn't intend harm to your person.
Yeah, who you don't know if they're intending harm.
Okay, so
that's the basic distinction between the day and the night. Why it was different.
So how self-defense actually works versus somebody breaking onto your property. Your thought should not be to shoot first and ask questions later.
Exactly.
Okay.
Your thought should be, hey, let's find out if there's a problem here.
Yeah.
On the anti-gun side, on the Christians should not own guns, should not use lethal force to defend themselves. There's two main passages that people will be looking towards, and they're both coming from Jesus. And Jesus, who said, "He who lives by the sword shall die by it," when Peter cuts off the ear of the Roman guard in the Garden of Gethsemane, he says, "Put away your sword; those who live by the sword will die by it." And then there's the other one that's more commonly used, I think, of if someone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. The point being, Christians, you should be completely self-sacrificial. So even if somebody wants to do you harm, you should care so much about your testimony as a Christian in forgiving and loving the sinner that you should even be willing to give up your life in a self-defense kind of a scenario as a testimony. So those would be the two sides. Obviously, you can tell just by my presentation which one I kind of err towards, and the fact that I'm a gun owner. Those two are mine. Those are kind of the biblical considerations on either side. Thoughts to add, guys?
Well, I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but just the not causing a brother to stumble. I think even if we do have the right. And obviously, I think we do. I also am a gun owner. If it's going to be a stumbling block to someone, I don't think we should flaunt it. I think that we are within our rights. So the passage I'm referring to is eating food sacrificed to idols.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't ever say that they can't do it at all. It just says don't do it in front of those who are basically of a weaker faith, and this would cause them to stumble. So I do think there should be some limits on if it's going to negatively impact your testimony to someone, don't bring it up. Don't exercise that right.
I thought you were saying you shouldn't kill somebody in front of your neighbor if it's going to cause them to.
We can stop a little short of killing there.
That's a great passage to inappropriately co-opt to make fun of vegetarians.
There you go. There you go.
By the way, just on a non-good note. But
and then, of course, everything is permissible but not beneficial, right? So I would not say that owning a gun is not beneficial, but I would say it is permissible.
Okay. Thoughts? Anything to add from a biblical perspective?
Well, I do want to play, what we play devil's advocate, literally on the show, right? But I think it's interesting. We have a set of scriptures that we're looking at here on the pro-gun side, on the anti-gun side, and I do know there are those who would discuss, most of your pro-gun side verses come from the Old Testament. Your anti-gun side ones are not only from the New Testament, they're from Jesus himself. And do we place more importance on what Jesus said versus what we see in the Old Testament? Do we think it stands in opposition to what was said in the Old Testament? I don't really think that's the case, but I do think it's something to discuss.
Yeah.
I don't view the Old Testament as lesser scripture. I don't think that's fair at all. There's a reason that we've been given it, and there's a reason that it's such a long part of the Christian tradition. But the Old Testament is something that's been fulfilled, so there is a shift in what has happened in many parts of what's discussed in the Old Testament to the New Testament.
Yes, and so this is relating to what we talked about last time, first episode, about understanding the Bible and how should it be understood? Primarily, first as a story. It's telling one continuous story. It's telling about humans die, and that by Christ, by faith in Christ, they shall live. That's the point of the biblical story. And so in this story, there's this one part where the nation of Israel is receiving laws, and through the progress of this story, how does that relate to where we are in the story, in between Revelation chapters 3 and 4? Revelation chapters 3 and 4. Yeah, I think that's a valid consideration to bring up as well. My brief answer to anybody wondering about New Testament and Old Testament understanding is the Old Testament conveys in various places God's moral law. It makes explicit what is written on the hearts of man, and so I would think Exodus 22 would be an example of one of those places. Plenty of places all throughout the law where the actual letters of the law are no longer directly applicable. Like we're talking about the day and night thing. Okay, we have electricity now. That's gonna change the equation,
Right.
But the principle that gave rise to the specific law is part of the moral law that is constant, unchanging, part of God's character. And so that would be how at least a starting place for how to parse out the Old and New Testament.
Okay. Certainly, if you don't feel comfortable owning a gun or feel that it would be sinful for you, following what Jesus said here, and again, these are things that don't inherently involve guns. They involve knives and blunt instruments and plywood with or 2x4s with nails stuck through them or whatever. The various instruments that I believe the citizens of Chicago attempt to defeat the robots with in the Will Smith movie I, Robot.
Yeah.
The classic Hebrew 2x4.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Definitely. Well, but it's actually like what 1 3/4
1 3/4
inches.
by 3/4. Yeah. Dimensional lumber. Don't get me started.
Hebrews had real 2x4s. They were 2x4. Part of this conversation as well, and hopefully you're just using this as a springboard for your own conversations, but living in the United States, we have to take in the constitutional considerations. The Second Amendment specifically guarantees the right to bear arms. And I'm going to read it for you word for word in case you've never heard it. I'm assuming you probably have. But Second Amendment, which follows the First Amendment, surprise, surprise. First Amendment being freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of association, religion. Second Amendment being a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. This seems to the right side of the aisle like a pretty cut and dry, axiomatic sort of statement. Do we get to have guns? Yes. Do you get to own a gun? Yes. As an American citizen, that is guaranteed to you in the Constitution. The question always comes up, though, how far does this go? How far does this right extend? What arms are you entitled to keep and bear that shall not be infringed? Are you allowed to own a rocket launcher? Are you allowed to own grenades? Are you allowed to own a tank? Are you allowed to own a nuke? Are these the things that individual Americans, under the Second Amendment, have a right to own? And so I want to hear you guys' opinions on that. What do you think? How far does the Second Amendment go? How far should it go? Just from a legal perspective, as an American, speaking as an American, how far do you think it should go?
That's a great question. I will lead off by saying that with the right taxes and background checks and governmental loopholes, you actually can own things like a functioning tank in this country, if you didn't know that. So if you are in the market for a tank, well, there you go.
I believe one of our recent mayoral candidates here in Houston parked a tank out on his lawn and got in trouble for it. Tony Busby did that.
Really? I didn't know that.
Nice. Okay. Man, I should have. All right, there you go. But that being said, yeah, I think that a lot of people will take the well-regulated militia part of this and kind of blow it up, but I won't. I've read a few things about historical context. I don't have a lot of authority to speak on that, but it was a different time, and the concept of all of that was a little bit different back then. But
so all we should be allowed to own is muzzle loading.
Of course not.
Right?
No, of course not.
Why not?
Well, because at the time, I would say the cannon was probably the pinnacle of military technology, and someone could own a cannon at that time. Yeah. So at this time, I think a nuclear weapon is the pinnacle of military technology, and if you as a private citizen are able to afford or develop your own nuclear weapon, I don't believe the Second Amendment actually prohibits you from doing so. Now, obviously, there are laws such as I don't even know if the
Second Amendment doesn't prohibit you from anything. It protects your freedom to
correct.
do
So
things.
under the Second Amendment alone, I would say there is no limitation.
All right. So you're going. Private citizens should be able to own nukes if they're able to.
Sure. Would I own one? Probably not. I'd have a lot of people knocking at my door that I didn't want around. But
all right. So we got the no limitations whatsoever. Ty, what do you think?
Well, and this is where your principle versus pragmatism thing comes in.
Precisely.
In principle, I think Randall's 100% correct in regards to the precedent that is set by the Second Amendment and how far-reaching it goes. I think we have to understand in the originalist context of this that firearms were not simply in the purview of military or a militia. They're a significant part of people's livelihood for hunting purposes, in the American, which the Second Amendment was.
Yeah.
There are people whose jobs legitimately depended on them going out shooting things for food or shooting beavers to send beaver pelts, down the Mississippi River so British people could have fancy hats.
Yeah, I hear that.
Jeremiah
but
Johnson
they specifically mention militia.
I understand
in
that
the
they
amendment,
specifically mention militia, but I think it's fair to look at
the culture.
I think it's fair to look at when that law was made, how that was set out, and understand that there's no way this was simply limited to militia arms. Because that was simply factually not the case when the law was made.
Gotcha.
And from a constitutional perspective, there's now centuries of legal precedent that allow people to own guns. So I think we need to, just to say it, people often talk, we could do what Australia did, we could do what all these other countries that have imposed significant limitations, confiscation or buybacks of guns. The fact that we have a very difficult to amend document that we consider the supreme law of the land, plus, over 2 centuries of legal precedent that allows Americans to own guns, that allows them, at what point should they, that can be something that I suppose that we're trying to debate now. But on the principle of the law, you can probably own anything that you can get your hands on. But it's one of those things, you can own it, but can you obtain it? And this is where you can make your set. So you can own a nuclear warhead, but it's illegal to purchase one. You can own a nuclear warhead, but it's illegal to obtain the materials required to make one.
This reminds me of, I grew up in Singapore, and lots of people think that chewing gum is illegal over there. It's not illegal to chew gum. It's illegal to buy or sell gum within the country. So there's a black market for gum, for sure. You go back to the States for your summer break, and you come back, and a good portion of your suitcase is gum. And,
right.
Really?
So it kind of lines up with what you're saying, is that you would say you can. There's definitely, speaking legally, you should be allowed to own anything.
If we're arguing the constitutional principle of the matter.
But I want to know you specifically. Where are you going to stand? My personal
opinion, no, I don't.
Where do you
think
draw the line?
I don't think you should be able to own anything.
Okay.
Where do you draw the line? That's a subject matter of considerable debate, and I would not say I'm sure on that. But I'm also not for. I'm not for the confiscation or the obtain. The government requiring that you give up weapons that are in the hands of private citizens at this point in time.
Okay, but I'm going to push you to at least so you don't have to take a hard stance of this is where I'm going to defend, this is where, but give me a soft, okay, I think I'm probably right about in between rocket launchers and grenade launchers. That's where I'm going to draw the line. Where about?
Anything?
I think it's things that launch, non. I guess not bullet-based. I don't know the gun terminology for it, but
okay.
Things that don't fire what we would generally consider bullets. Things that are firing, heavier explosives.
Probably going to put a caliber limit on this as well.
Well, you put a caliber limit on this. You could be owning a shotgun, but not a howitzer, or something like that. I think it's one of those things. We've had Supreme Court justices say, "I know it when I see it."
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Byron White on pornography, I believe. Yeah. But it's one of those things. I know the limit when I see it. So that's not a good answer.
That's
enough. A good answer.
That's enough.
If a Supreme Court justice has used it, you can use it.
Yeah.
And I would add that while I think you should theoretically be allowed to own a nuclear weapon, there are plenty of laws that I agree with that prevent you from using it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, there's another thing.
That's
owning it versus using it.
Yeah, and how you use it and why you use it on any
how
weapon.
You use a gun matters. What?
Yeah, I know, right? That's where the discussion should be, and almost never is. The question is, how are you using this inanimate object, not what is this inanimate object?
Well, and one could debate again that the Constitution doesn't. I mean, depending on how you interpret the militia element of the Second Amendment, one could argue that the Constitution doesn't really outline where the federal government can or cannot mandate using it. One could, I guess, argue you can own guns, but you can't fire. You can't use them. Mm-hmm. Certainly, you can own guns, but you can't use them indiscriminately on other citizens. That's a law in every state in the country.
Yeah, I was say there's plenty of other laws that are going to intersect with this right.
Right.
Most notably, murder. You're not allowed to murder people. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
That's another law that's specifically
destruction of property. I mean, you've got all that.
The outright banning of their use that becomes a really thorny issue, and it's something that over 200 years of legal precedent in the United States is that you can use a firearm. Yeah. So it's not like these little devices that allowed you to illegally make free long distance calls in the 70s. They weren't illegal to own. They were just illegal to use.
Yeah.
There's the bear arms part of that as well. I think the bear arms would traditionally be meant
no sleeves?
No, transplant the arms of a furry mammal under
Gotcha,
your body.
okay.
But, also, too, I think the traditional definition or understood definition of that would be to use said arms.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree, obviously. One thing that I try to stress, so I'm in Stephen's ideal world, in libertarian-minded Stephen's ideal world, I routinely advocate for a world that is actually far less safe, but far more free. I am much more concerned with freedom than safety. There are things that I will advocate for that will almost necessarily lead to more people getting hurt, more people dying, more people. I don't think that speed limits should be a thing. I don't think that the government has any right to tell you how fast you're allowed to drive your car. I think the government has a right to punish you if you hurt somebody by driving your car too fast. And a good principle, again, from Scripture, where I get this idea of how then should the government. I'll back up real quick and say that I think at its base root, the government's job is to assess punitive damages for the violation of interpersonal morality. So a couple of specific things on that. Punitive. It's the government's job to come in and punish you when you violate morality, not to keep you from violating morality. Second thing, interpersonal morality. When you violate interpersonal morality, it's not the government's job to protect you from yourself. So I absolutely detest seatbelt laws. Nothing gets me onto a libertarian rant more than seatbelt laws. It's not. There's no way that a seatbelt can hurt. Not wearing a seatbelt can hurt anybody but me. And so it's not the government's job to tell me I'm not allowed to hurt myself. Now, as a Christian, I think you shouldn't hurt yourself. You should wear a seatbelt. You should do these things. It's just not the government's place to tell you can't do those things. It's the government's job to assess punitive damages for violation of interpersonal morality. And this is obviously me talking. I'm not speaking for them right now. And I would get this from the Noahic covenant. When Noah gets off the ark, God says, man sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. That's where I see the seed form of this statement of government's purpose. But as far as how this relates to guns, why am I even bringing this up? I'm constantly saying I think that there should be far fewer gun laws than what we have, but I think that there should be much stricter gun laws and much stricter penalties for people who do not own their firearms responsibly. I think that if somebody gets hurt using your gun, whether you had anything to do with that or not, you are responsible for that gun, and so you should pay a price. If you don't lock up your gun and your 16-year-old steals it from your room and goes out and shoots the neighbor's kids, I think you're responsible for that. You should pay a penalty almost harsher than what the kid who commits the crime is. I think that responsibility in gun ownership is an under-discussed part of this whole issue. And where I get this, so Deuteronomy 22:8 actually is a fun little thing that, again, is the principle behind it that's interesting. Again, just a list of laws, just boom, 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 kind of rapid fire. And God says to the people of Israel, when you build a new house, you shall make a parapet for your roof so that you will not bring blood guilt on your house if anyone falls from it. And what's this saying? He does not say that you will be punished under the nation's laws if you don't build a parapet, right? So a parapet like a little fence. So you build a house. If you're going to build a house, you need to build a little fence around the roof, around the edge of the roof. Back in this time, it's very common to be standing out on the roof of a house. You'd often, if you're having a gathering, it's like the family room is on the roof of the house. The instruction was you need to put a fence there so that if someone accidentally falls off somebody, it's not as likely that somebody's going to fall off the roof. Now, if you go into the Mishnah, the oral tradition related to this law, there's a harsher penalty for you, the house owner, if someone dies from falling off your roof if you didn't have a parapet than if you did. You are responsible more so because you did not take the responsible precaution. But there's no penalty for not having a parapet on your roof. If nobody ever falls off your roof and nobody ever dies, you're never going to get punished by the government for it, by the nation of Israel. But if you didn't have a parapet and somebody falls off your roof, you're going to get a harsher punishment because you should have had one. It was your responsibility. Rights come with responsibilities. This is the point. And the responsibility part of gun ownership, and again, I think it's under-discussed along with the rights. I'm going to go ahead and call it there because we are well into this thing. We're in a
We didn't
minute.
even get to talk about, is it a response, guns as a response to tyranny,
Yeah, that's true.
Yes, of course.
which was the point of the new Star Wars movie, if you saw it.
I haven't seen the new one
Okay,
yet.
well,
Better than
I
7 or 8.
vowed not to spend money on that thing
Okay, well,
after Last Jedi came out. So
if and when you do see, it's the movie's the anti-Last Jedi, but
okay.
there's an element where it's very much, what is this Navy? It's not a Navy, it's just people. Well, if they didn't have the right to own laser cannons, then they wouldn't have won.
Turbo lasers type.
Spoiler alert.
Interesting. Okay. I have no idea what's being discussed right now. But last little hot take parting shot. My own opinion. If you do not know the difference between fully automatic and semi-automatic, or you do not know what the AR stands for in AR-15, you should not be allowed to make gun laws. You should go look those up and be aware of them. Thanks. We will see you guys next time. One more time, reasonrefrain.com. Everything is Reason Refrain. Find us on YouTube, Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at Reason Refrain. We like this show. We think it's worthwhile. Tell your friends. Word of mouth is the best thing. So if you want to help us out, tell your friends, hey, go look up Reason Refrain. They know what they're talking about. Yeah. Or they don't and they're funny about it. So
Somebody's looking at me.
we will see you next time. Thanks for coming on the show, Randall.
Yeah, thanks,
Appreciate
Randall.
it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Bye, guys.